Go ahead and walk through the Chameleon configuration file for Prusa Slicer. I'm using version 2.1, and the way I use this is very simple. We just go to the import, the config bundle, and you're going to download the file that I have. Here we see our config bundle for the 3D Chameleon, Prusa Slicer 3D Chameleon config bundle. We'll hit open on that. So now what that's done is that's configured Prusa for having multiple extruders. So here you can see I have the 4 extruders. If you want to, you can go ahead and change this in printer settings. Right now it's limited under the general to 4 extruders, but you can actually have as up to 32, I believe, in Prusa Slicer here, which is kind of nice. The one thing that you want to do when you do add new extruders is you want to go ahead and give them their own color code. So down here in the bottom, just go ahead and change that. Let me go ahead and load a model real quick here and just show you how easy this is to work with. So I've got this butterfly. I happen to have 4 parts here. When I hit open, it says it's a multi-part object detected. So we're going to say, yeah, we're going to go ahead and load that as a multi-part object. And you can see it's loaded this articulated butterfly. And here we have the 4 models, butterfly 1, butterfly 2, butterfly 3, and butterfly body. And each one of those is assigned its own extruder. And if you want to, you can change those extruders around to whatever you want. So maybe it's something like that. You like that color better. And literally that's all there is to it. You can go ahead and slice that. And the slicing will automatically generate the purge block here. It'll also generate an initial purge for each one of the colors. So as it's warming up the printer, once it gets warm, it'll go ahead and do a little extrusion for each one of them. And you can see the purge block. And on this particular case, I'm also building it on a raft. That's not really necessary, but it's in there. If you look very carefully, you can also see it's got supports down inside of there. So those are settings that you can go ahead and tweak however you want to within your whatever your process configuration parameters needs. So that's all there is to using it. Let's go ahead and see how it works. Really, the only changes that we did were to create a new profile that has, in our case, 4 extruders. They do require the use of relative E distances on the platter to actually generate the purge block. We do have a little hack that we need to actually use absolute position on the extruder for when we're doing the color changes. So I will show you that little tweak that we made there. This is one difference from the other slicers. So for example, Simplify and Cura, neither one require this. For some reason, Prusa requires that. But here's the little workaround for you. We have our custom G code, and in our start, the only thing that I have added to the start G code is simply a block of code that reloads the filament into the extruder. So this case, what we have is when the printer starts, you start with the filament out of it, basically 1 inch before the Y adapters. And then this code simply will load it. And then in the ending G code, I have right here, pretty much the same as the other, where we actually have to ram the tip and remove it and let it cool down and shape it so that it's properly formed for the next time you're printing with it. So our NG code also does that. Now here's that little trick I was talking about with the Prusa Slicer, that it uses relative E distances, but our code always uses absolute E distances. And in fact, you can see here I've actually changed this code in the start G code to use relative. So E100 and then another E100 will actually move at 200 millimeters. Where if we're using absolute values, E100 and immediately followed by an E100 would only move it, the first command would move at 100 millimeters, the second one would move at 0 millimeters, and the third one would actually move it backwards to 55 millimeters. So it would move backwards 45 millimeters. But with relative, these are all forward motions. And since we're moving forward and backward and dancing around, and I'd prefer to have common code between all of the slicers, I decided to go this route using this little trick to turn the printer into absolute extruder distances only during the tool changes. And then when we're done, we use the M83 command to turn it back to relative. So we have our text that we display on the screen here, and then we turn the fan off. And then these, because we're in absolute mode, we go ahead and reset the extruder position to 0, and we move the extruder over to the right or the left-hand side of the printer next to the button. We go ahead and do our dance that moves the filament in and out and shapes the tip correctly. And then once it's done, then we go ahead and back the filament out to a position of 250. So we have -120, another -80, and then another -50 here. And that's all we do for shutting that down. And later on, when we're running the printer, we have a tool change G-code. And again, just like we did on all the other software packages, we're using our previous and next extruder text markers inside of here to actually indicate that we're loading them and unloading them. We turn off the fan again. We go ahead and do our dance. So this is the exact same code that we saw in the end G-code. But now here's where it changes. We very critically, again, I can't stress this enough, whenever you're doing a tool change, you want to make sure you have the M84E command in there to disable the stepper motor. That turns off the electronics driving the stepper motor, so the motor can be unplugged and plugged back in, which is what our switch technically is doing. We then go ahead and set the new text on the display and move to the left-hand side of the extruder. We move it over to the left-hand side of the printer next to the button. And now here is the logic that Prusa uses to check to see what extruder we were on and what extruder we're going to, and then it goes ahead and presses the buttons appropriately. So if we're going from extruder 0 to extruder 1, it needs to press the left button. If we're going from extruder 0 to extruder 2, it needs to press the right button. And then likewise with extruder 0 to 3, it's got to press both buttons. So you see we have two different blocks of code here. Now I realize that this is a little inefficient in the if and if blocks. I could have just wrapped those two in the same statement. But it turns out again, to be common across all of the other slicers, this is the method that we use because other slicers do not have this block conditional statements like the end if gives us. So this goes through all of the various scenarios that you can have for up to 4 extruders. If you have 8 extruders, you're just going to basically copy this logic and add your numbers to it. Then when we're done selecting the extruder, we then want to go back to a parking position where the filament can warm back up and load back into the extruder. So here, if we're greater than extruder 1, we're going to go to the left side or the right side of the extruder x-axis. If we're under that, we're going to go to the left side of it and warm up. And this just makes motion a little bit more efficient. And then once we've done that, we can go ahead and turn the motor back on. We can go ahead and reload the filament back into the extruder. And here's where we restore the relative E distances so that the rest of the system will work. And then we go ahead and set the text on the display. So each one of the extruders themselves, there's really no change to them. We really didn't make any differences. There's no modifications here. I do add a little Z-lift in here. That's just for my own, preferences, not necessarily required. And then I actually have the retraction speed, extra restart, things like that set to 0. And in fact, when we go to the single extruder multi-material setup, I went ahead and set all these values to 0 as well. The reason I set those to 0 is because these are kind of doing exactly what we're doing in our dance. We have the cooling, the tube position, the length. If you want to, this code will work just fine. If all you're going to be using is Prusa Slicer, you can actually add these values And then in our custom G code for the tool changing, when you're removing this, that's this dance here. All of this code here in this block is basically what that block is doing. It's kind of duplicated, but you know, I was kind of lazy, I guess, if you will, and that this code was already written. We haven't changed it any, where I would have to redo all of this, and then it wouldn't be similar for it. But I can guarantee you somebody's going to be doing that, taking advantage of what the Prusa has built into their slicing engine. So like I said, that's all there is to it. There are no other changes that we've made. You simply open our config bundle that gives you all of the settings, and then you can apply them. Of course, you can go through here and change the colors of these however you want to. Each one of these extruders has its own color settings selected for it, so you can choose those. Also, you might want to have a configuration setting for your the filament types that you have, but I'll leave that up to you. Purging volumes, this is just teaching you Prusa, not necessarily the Chameleon, but you know, I have all the values set at 70. This is just the default settings, but if you decide that, you know, maybe you have a black and a white and you have a lot of bleed through on those two colors, you know, those are, maybe let's call it tool 1 and tool 2. You can actually change these values, and what that'll do is that will adjust the size of this purge block for each color so that you get an appropriate amount of purging. Now, this is probably one of the nicest slicers that are out there for handling multi-materials. All of the features that, you know, Prusa needs in their MMU unit are coincidentally all the kind of the same features that we need. So I highly encourage the community to go ahead and develop this one even further. I would love to see you know, more profiles set up for this. You know, maybe the 8 color, all the way up to the 32 colors. I would love to see a machine run this with 32 colors. By the way, for those of you that only have 2 color systems, all you're going to be using is the first two extruders. It does not hurt anything at all to have a setup like this, where I have 4 colors, 4 objects with 2 different colors, right? So in this case, when I slice this, you'll see the imagery appear here in a second. There we go. So now I have just 2 extruders being used, extruder 1 and extruder 2. Now you want to make sure you do this. Extruder 1 and 2 are going to be the first 2. They're going to be the only 2 used on the 2 color system. If you have the 4 color system, you can go ahead and then change the 3rd and 4th colors. So I hope that gives you a good intro to the Prusa Slicer 3D Chameleon edition. This happens to be on the Under 3, but it can, you know, pretty much work with any other printer. By the way, if you want to change your printer settings, just go ahead and change the actual printer configuration itself. The filament settings and the print settings shouldn't need to change. The print configuration is just simply going to change the layout of the physical printer, like the size of it, and, you know, maybe what you call the name of it, things like that. But so there it is. Thanks for watching.